My name is Paul Connet. I guess I could call myself Professor Paul Connet because I ended up as a full professor teaching chemistry at St. Lawrence University. But a lot happened before that. I first went to the United States in 1966 to start a PhD in biochemistry. But as John Lennon says in one of his songs, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I was only a year and a half into that, and I got involved with the Vietnam peace movement. That in turn led me to the McCarthy for President campaign, and that in turn led me to Lowenstein for Congress campaign. And Lowenstein was the person that introduced me to the Biafran issue. And I spent 2 years on the Biafran issue, and that's where I met my wife, Ellen, who was a volunteer in that campaign, American Committee to Keep Biafra Alive. Eventually, Biafra fell in early 1970. My wife and I got married, and the next day we took a boat to Europe. And in Europe, we set up a group called International Conscience in Action. And this was an attempt to keep the enormously wonderful coalition of people, both in the United States and many other countries, that have worked on Biafra, on an issue in which human rights were sacrificed in the name of internal problems. Governments wouldn't act. The United Nations wouldn't act. But citizens acted to try to get justice to the Biafran people. And we said if this ever happened again, we'd go into action. We'd use that whole coalition. And of course, in 1971, in March, Bangladesh, or at least the massacre of the East Pakistanis took place. The Sheikh Mujib was put into prison. And so we were very quick into going into action. We mobilized that coalition, and in London we formed a group called Action Bangladesh, 34 Stratford Villas in Camden Town, where we worked with Bengali students, with the Bengali officials, Abu Saeed Chowdhury. We worked with very, very closely indeed. And I guess there were several big moments for us. One was putting a big advertisement in the Times newspaper signed by many famous writers and politicians calling on the British government to recognize Bangladesh and not to accept this as an internal problem. And then the next thing that we did, a big rally in Trafalgar Square, August the 1st. You know, I mentioned John Lennon. The other Beatle, of course, very famous for this, is George Harrison. And we were the first ones to play that song, that famous song, Bangladesh, at that rally on August the 1st, 1971, in Trafalgar Square, in front of about 10,000, maybe 20,000 people. So that rally was very dramatic. It was very big. It was covered on BBC. ITN didn't cover it. And then what people may not know is a couple of weeks later, the Pakistan government staged its own rally. And we knew this would be big. We knew it would get TV coverage. And we said to us, how can we get equal time for this? We had no money to have another rally. And so what we did for a very little money, we rented some military uniforms, some mock rifles, a loudspeaker system for a car. We got a peaceful demonstration of Bengali men, women, and children in front of the American embassy that was supporting Pakistan. They were all dressed in white. And our two cars we tipped off the TV. Our two cars arrived with our Bengali soldiers, Pakistan Army soldiers in their uniforms. They got out of the car, they advanced on the peaceful demonstration with their guns. We played the gunfire over the loudspeakers. This is in Grosvenor Square, the gunfire's echoing all over the place. And of course, on cue, the Bengali men, women, and children in their white saris and lungis and things with stage blood. Blood, and they collapsed on the ground. And meanwhile, the TV cameras are rolling. And it happened. We couldn't have got it better. On TV that night, on both BBC One and BBC Two, they covered, I think, a massacre or something from Bangladesh that night. And then they said, and in Trafalgar Square, the Pakistan supporters, blah, 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 blah. And then, meanwhile, there was the American eagle on top of the American embassy, and then they went into the massacre. Wow. And we got equal time, and this was for about £50 for the rental of that equipment. as far as the rally was concerned, we organized as many of our friends and English supporters as we possibly could. The Bengali administration and the students were getting thousands and thousands of Bengalis there. They closed down the Bengali restaurants so the restaurant workers could go to this rally. And I think we had John Williams, the famous guitarist. He agreed to play. George Harrison, I mentioned, George Harrison agreed to have his song Bangladesh played. This is whilst we were waiting for the speakers. But looking behind me, I see lovely Abu Saeed Chowdhury, who I was again to meet in Bangladesh after the war because he became president. That's John Stonehouse MP, who did so much to mobilize the British MPs. We had advertisement with over 220 MPs calling for the recognition of Bangladesh. I'm not sure who this lovely person is here. Not sure who they are. I see, I'm down here. This is me here. But we had all our supporters there. It was a marvelous feeling seeing all those thousands of people. And then we walked down whatever that road is, and we delivered a message to Downing Street, and then I'm not sure. I think did we go to Hyde Park? I don't know, but it was a wonderful day. My wife was getting very much involved. She said to me right at the beginning in March when we set up Action Bangladesh, she says, "I don't want to go that route. I don't want any more signing petitions and demonstrations. Anything I do, I want to focus on getting help directly to the Bengali people." And so she was helpful in setting up a group called Operation Omega, based upon the philosophy of Taya Dujardin, which was basically, at a certain point in history, all human beings would come together and international borders would dissolve, rather like John Lennon's song, Imagine there's no countries. And the idea was that no country had the right to use a border to separate people in need from people that wanted to help. And so they drove an old army ambulance all the way across Europe, eventually to Bombay, eventually across India to Calcutta, and then that ambulance stuffed with medicines was driven across the border. They literally crashed the border into Pakistan, East Pakistan as it was then, with all the TV cameras rolling and everything else. And all the Pakistani did was to push the ambulance back. But we got that huge international coverage from the fact that they weren't allowing help to get in. And they did it again. Operation Omega did it again. And this time they held them for 2 days. Now, meanwhile, I had joined my wife because Parliament had gone into recess in the UK, so there wasn't much I could do there. And I thought to get some credibility on our political work, I had to go into Bangladesh to see it for myself. Meanwhile, in Calcutta, we were approached by a Bengali major who said, Bengali doctor actually, says, "We need medicines. The villages have no medicine. We've got to have medicine. Can you help us get medicines from the relief agencies?" Because they were helping all the refugees. So we approached the relief agencies, and yes, sure enough, they were very helpful. They said yes, they could supply all the medicines that this doctor wanted. But we said to him, we will only do this if you let us come in with you to make sure these are given to the right people, given to the villages. So he said, okay. So after a few days on the Indian border, we were allowed in. We went in, there's one other fellow, myself, Freya Spreckley. We went in with the Muktijuddho, about 150, armed to the teeth. That we had a little ITN camera. I had my own camera, 35 millimeter camera. We went in, we could only walk at night, and then during the day we slept. They disguised us in lungis, if you please, with our long white legs. He was tall, I was tall. Anyway, and then we transferred to boat, and we went for 2 days and 2 nights on the monsoon water. And we eventually arrived in this little island, and it was run by a Baptist minister. And I'd only been there 2 or 3 days when over the Pakistan radio it said 2 of the Omega workers had been arrested. And one of them was a woman. There was only one woman in Operation Omega at that time, and that was my wife, and she'd promised me faithfully that she wasn't going to get involved in any of these intrusions. She was just there for secretarial support, moral support. So there I am in the middle of Bangladesh. My wife has been captured. So now I've got to get out as fast as I can. But whilst we went in with 150 Mukti Bahini, we went out with 4 students, unarmed students, and 1 guide, and we had to travel with the refugees. And it took us 10 days to get out. I mean, excruciatingly long time, a lot of adventures and so on. Actually walked through a Pakistan army camp at night, quietly. Because, if they captured us, 2 tall white men, Englishmen, they would have assumed the worst, that we were somehow spies or something. We had to travel with the refugees coming out. And I remember this one time we were all in our boats. We were in the boats on the water, and we had to go through this under this gate, under this bridge. And the Pakistan troops were manning this bridge, and we had to wait in the boats to then, with the signal, rush through and get through this bridge. And just at this moment, we're waiting to go, and a baby starts crying. And then there's pandemonium, and all the boats just rushed away. And took us another day. We had to go. We ended up in an island, and we spent overnight and tried again the next day. And this time we were able to go under this bridge and out. And then as we got towards the border, we literally had to walk through a camp or a post or whatever it was on the border. And I remember walking past these barracks. The lights were on. You could hear them talking. I thought, oh my God, if they come out now, they're going to assume the worst, that we are spies or whatever we are, mercenaries or something. And of course, I was scared stiff too that what was going to happen to my wife if that happened. Anyway, we got through, and then I remember walking across the fields, and the first 2 people that we met, they said, without us even asking, oh, Operation Omega. They assumed white. They said, Operation Omega. They said, oh, those workers of yours, they got 2 years in prison. Oh my God, this is going from a nightmare to sheer hell. Now I have to go back as fast as we can to Calcutta, and then to fly back to England to see her friends in England, to try to get the MPs to do something, and then fly to the United States to calm her parents down. This is the first time I've seen her parents after the wedding. We were married, then the next day we came to Europe. So now this is reunion. Their son-in-law has got their wife into prison. Of course, I said, look, May and Bill, I said, I told her, she assured me she wasn't going in. It's not my fault, for goodness sake. Eventually they calmed down, and we had a very nice couple of months together as we tried to negotiate with the State Department. And all I said to the State Department people, I said, look, you and I both know that India's going to go in. They can't take millions of refugees coming in. They're not going to take it. They're going to go in. And I said, all I want you to do is to try to get her from Jessore prison, which is just 20 miles across the border. Get her from Jessore to Dhaka. And I said, then when the war comes, the Americans evacuate, as they always do, she might be got out. But at least she won't be in harm's way. Well, they didn't do it. And actually, a couple of days before the war happened, there was a picture of my wife and Gordon Slavin, who had been arrested with her, the front page of the New York Times. And it was an AP photograph, went around the world. And I don't know whether that was the State Department's way of protecting my wife, knowing that the war was happening. But anyway, there was a little TV clip as well on the television. And meanwhile, our little footage that we'd shot on ITN, that was on television. We'd shot some of the smoke rising from the villages where the Russian planes had dropped some bombs and stuff. And later on, one of the black and white photographs I'd taken of the Mukti Bahini, that was in Time magazine. December 10th, Life magazine, December 10th. Anyway, within a couple of days, I got the wonderful message that my wife had been liberated and she was on her way back to India, and then lovely Air India flew her free back to America. And unheard of, they let my parents from Sussex get on the plane whilst it was standing at Heathrow Airport and say, welcome her home and so on. Unheard of. Wonderful. Wonderful how suddenly red tape is cut for human moments like that. And then she, of course, arrived back in JFK Airport. The TV cameras there, the press is going crazy. By now they all know. And the next day she was on NBC Today program just after John Galbraith and so on. Wonderful moment, but there was more to come. After all that, we got back to a home in New Jersey, Dumont, New Jersey, after all the fuss had settled down, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law gone to bed. She says, I've got something to tell you. I'm pregnant. In Jessore prison, she'd found out that she was pregnant. She had conceived in Calcutta, very fertile place, Calcutta. If you're having trouble having children, go to Calcutta. Fertile place. And she found that she was pregnant. In fact, the prisoners in there, they were lovely, they got on well, and they forced her to deliver a baby. Shishu, they said, Shishu. And they forced her to deliver a baby in prison. And we never found out whether it was meant to bring her luck because she was pregnant, or whether it was going to bring luck to the person that was having the baby to have it delivered by a pregnant person. But that was our first child, and we called him Peter William Mujib. I'm not sure the exact dates she came back, but it would have been December 1st or 2nd, somewhere around then. I know that when she was released, I was able to go to the press and get my 2 pennyworth in. I've got a copy of my statement with me to give to the museum, because I said it was outrageous when India went in and liberated Bangladesh. It was like the Americans going into Paris during World War II and liberating Paris. All the Bengalis were at the side of the hooray, hooray, hooray. And yet that rest of that hypocritical world at the United Nations condemned India for aggression. Practically every country in the United Nations who had not lifted a finger to protect those Bengalis when they were being massacred by Yahya Khan and the Pakistan army, all of a sudden spring into action when India ends this horrible situation. How hypocritical can you get? A, they didn't move when they should have done, and when they should have gone and said, well, thank God that India's done the right thing here, they condemned India. So you can imagine, I had all this pent-up anger, and I let it rip at a press conference. So whether it did any good or not, I don't know, but certainly in my memory, I got it's outrageous. Well, it was a couple of things. It was, again, an opportunistic thing that I was invited to join this mission of reconciliation by a friend of mine, Sarul Hoda, who was a Bihari, and but he worked for Bangladesh. And Right Honourable David Ennals, the former health minister in the Labour government, and I think Bruce Douglas Mann, MP, and another MP whose name I forgot, a Conservative. And so we were taken to Pakistan, to Islamabad, and David Ennals had a one-on-one with Bhutto. We never met Bhutto. And to India, where he met the Indian government officials, and then, of course, with Sheikh Mujib in Bangladesh. And I met Sheikh Mujib at that time. And because we were all very, very concerned at that time with the Biharis who were trapped in enclaves, because they had sided, the Urdu-speaking had sided with always worked for the West Pakistan government in East Pakistan, and had sided with the Pakistan army. So the tension between the people, you could imagine, when the liberation took place, these people hated people because of their role in the war, but as you know, always, maybe there's a few bad people, the vast majority were innocent people. So no involvement with the Pakistan army at all. and probably many sympathizers for the Bengalis. But I remember meeting with Sheikh Mujib in his, in the, whatever the Prime Minister's house was. And at that time I told him that our son had been called Peter William Mujib after him. He was obviously rather touched by that. And I remember walking down from the house to the gates, to this very large ground. And at that I said, I've got to tell him about the Biharis, how he pleased Sheikh Mujib. You're loved by your people. Please make sure that these people don't come to any harm. And so I'm telling this, he's got my hand. He's got my hand, and we're walking down the path, this thing, and I'm telling him, obviously he doesn't want to hear this. He does not want to hear about the Biharis at this point. And so we walk down, and he's saying he's doing everything is possibly can, but he never lets go of my hand as we're going through there. It was a kind of strange moment. Was this holding the hand? Was this embarrassment? Was it anger? Was it? I don't know, but I felt I did my duty. I mean, I had to do that. I knew it wasn't going to be welcome, any comments on this, but that's one of the reasons I went there, because I was known, obviously, as a friend of Bangladesh. I wasn't coming as an enemy of Bangladesh. I've been rewarded 100 times over, you know. My memories are the rewards, and meeting my friends again. That's the big. Having the opportunity to come here is the reward. That's the reward, and to be able to celebrate a victory is the reward. I mean, we've been celebrating since 1972.